Rasheeda, I invited you to talk to me because I've had several parents that have come to me and approached me, say, "Hey, Kyle, how can we be able to get the right representation for our child?" And it's difficult for me to be able to say, "Go to this agent and this agent," but I know you have been highly successful over the past couple of years to be able to represent some of the top tier talent coming out of Black colleges. So I wanted you to kind of give people an idea of what to expect and what type of questions they should be asking when it comes to finding the right representation.
Mm-hmm. For sure. It is definitely challenging. One of the first things I will say is that you definitely want to get someone that you can establish a relationship with. An agent is more than just someone who is a voice at the table. An agent is someone that actually helps build relationship not only with you, but your family as well as the league. They have to be able to represent all of your needs, your desires, what your expectations are. They're your voice, they're your mouthpiece. And so, in order to do that, they have to really know you. Many of our clients know me very personally. They know that they can call at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. They can show up at my door at 6 in the morning, and that there's a relationship there. That is very, very important when you're looking to seek representation. Now, many agents will come to the table with parents or the students and get on the phone and talk about what they've done for others. And I always say that's not necessarily the best approach. It's better to approach it from what you're willing to do for me. Because at the end of the day, I don't care who you have represented. I don't care what first rounds you represented, second round. I may not be that person. So what have you done for me? I would say that many agencies, big agencies, and there's no disrespect there, it's just what their priorities are, but they're going to represent your top 100 players. And those are the guys that are drafted day 1, day 2. When you start to get to day 3 and the later round players, you need people who have a history of somewhat being hustlers, salespeople on the ground, making sure you have the right marketing attached to you, making sure you have the resources poured into you. That means strength and conditioning, training, PR training, all of those things. If they're not going to give you those things to get you set up for success or don't have a history of doing that, then they're really just people trying to come up with you. And sometimes you can be that. I know specifically with Xavier, it was a first time kind of breaking through with FAMU. It wasn't my first time representing HBCU players, but with FAMU, and he challenged me a little bit on what he wanted. His family told me what they expected, and we came together. And he basically said, "I know you need me just as much as I need you," and that's how we formed that covenant that we were going to have that agent relationship. Sometimes it happens like that. So I really would say it's a relationship-based business. It is also, do they have a history of having connections to the league? So a question sometimes I would say the more experienced locker rooms with draft picks, they'll come and they'll ask me right away, well, how many teams have you had negotiations with? And I can boldly say 25 of the 32 teams. That means something. That means I can pick up the phone and make something happen. I need to. So that's important. I'll let you ask some more questions. I can go on and on.
Yeah, I mean, you were doing great, but there was you talked about the relationship that Xavier challenged you about having with him, and the need that you have to have with him as well. But one parent asked me, she said, "Kyle, I know there are agents that would go for, like you said, the top tier guys only, or if they come from a Power 4 conference or something to that nature, or even FCS, higher leagues or Division 1 that doesn't include HBCU. But how do you work with an HBCU or a kid coming from a Black college who needs representation?"
Yeah, so we do what we call an assessment. I'll tell you what we do in our agency. We start with it's my commitment in Lady Live Sports and Entertainment to always represent an HBCU player every single year, and we've done that since our inception. we've had the last two offensive play MVPs for the HBCU Legacy Bowl, who both went on to Path to Draft. NFL Network had Sports Illustrated articles. Like, we make things happen for them. But I think if you had to really narrow it down, there are a lot of players in HBCUs. There's a lot of players in P4s. Sometimes you're having 10 to 15,000 draftable players. So what it comes down to often is, if you have the talent, that's going to dictate the relationship. And what a lot of our young athletes believe is that I have excelled on this platform, so I can excel in the NFL. And I love what the young lady said right before I joined the call. Welcome to the NFL. The NFL is not for good college players. It's not for great college players. It's for exceptional players at the professional level. Because there, you're not meeting the guy that you played against at Norfolk State. Right. You're not meeting the guy at FAMU. You're not meeting the guy at Southern. You are meeting that P4 player that is coming day one and ready to take your head off. That's who you're meeting at the NFL, and that's who you're competing against. When you join the NFL, you are looking at what third string, second string guy can I knock off right away. If you can't do that and you haven't delivered that at no matter what school you go to, the HBCU level, it's going to be difficult to find representation, because representation does a deep scrub of a couple things.
Gotcha.
Character. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. Kim, I know Kim had a question. Go ahead.
All right. First of all, thank you, Rasheeda. It's great to meet you, and it's great information. And I wonder what kinds of things, Kyle said, he had a player's mother ask him, and oftentimes the players don't really have advocates in their family. But what kinds of things should a young player be looking to do? I mean, you mentioned how they scrub, they look for everything. If you were advising someone who's not your client yet, who is, hoping to be represented, what kinds of things should he or she be looking to make sure that they have in place so they're able to make a good decision and even to be attractive to an agency?
Yeah, let me give you 5 things real quick, because I know you guys are limited in time. Strength and conditioning. Make sure you're hitting that weight room. Make sure you're eating properly. It's going to be very important, because remember, the strength programs are very strong with your competition. Number 2, realize that the NFL is a much bigger stage. So you have to be the number 1 or number 2 captain guy for your position at your school. Number 3, understand that highlights don't please the NFL or any other professional league. They're going to look at nothing but the full game, the game that you did poorly on and the games in which you delivered well in. Lastly, or the 4th one I would say, is professionalism. Make sure that there's no cussing. Make sure your social media is cleaned up. Make sure people have your full name on your social media, because the NFL scout can't even find you because you're going by Little Ray Ray. We don't know who Little Ray Ray is. We need to know you need to tag your school, because that's going to increase your following. You need to follow football, NFL teams, CFL teams, UFL teams, because that's going to change your algorithm to make sure that those scouts can find you. And lastly, I would say, understand that you're going to need representation. You're going to need representation before your last collegiate game. Now, when I say that, legally and systematically, you cannot sign with an agent. However, you need to kind of align on who your top agents that you would go after would be, so that those people can get ready to represent you and are properly prepping you to make sure you get to a bowl, make sure you get a combine invite.
Let me ask you one quick follow-up, because I know Ray wants to ask you something. You talked about PR and communications, and I work in the media space, and do some of that training. Can you just talk about the importance of that? There's so many people now, especially because social media is so big, that don't really understand the value of what I call that third-party validation. But NFL teams feel like, or NBA teams, or pick a league, we're making such an investment, and we want to know a few things: that you're not going to embarrass us, right? That you can come and make a good representation of yourself. I mean, I remember the Giants used to have a questionnaire that they asked picks. It was 100 questions. Like, it sounds ridiculous, but they still do. So can you talk about how you navigate that and helping them understand the importance of that media piece?
Yeah. So the clients we serve, we automatically have them with PR and media training with our PR media team. And there's 7 individuals that work with them on how to remove ums, how to make sure your eyes don't shift when you're speaking, how to speak when you're being asked from the media, what to say, what not to say, how to not offer criticism, things like that. That is very important. But that social media presence is their only voice that they have to you, or your media days, or how you speak for your teams. So if you're in a blaming mode with your teams, if you're doing a lot of you know what I'm saying, it doesn't you won't represent the brand of that NFL team well, and they already know that they have an issue with not putting you in front of the camera, no matter how good you are. There are some great NFL players that you never hear from because they don't speak well.
Well, let me stay in that vein. When you talk about the social media presence, ever since I was teaching high school and helping some kids, I was like, hey, you have to be able to make sure people understand who you are. They're going to go back to your profiles. They're going to look at what you have done. Has there been instances where the athlete did not get a chance to have a workout or a tryout or visit with a team because of their NFL profile?
We've had instances where the NFL team has kind of contacted us and asked where the priorities were. So are the priorities with his boys gang banging and throwing up gang signs in a brand new car? Matter of fact, where did the car come from? Because we checked with his school and he did not get that amount of funds. We see that he's got a certain towel color hanging out or bandana. What is that about? We know what it's about. The NFL knows. You know, and the young people feel like they're so smart, but they're so intense investigative teams that work on this stuff. And they also know about the Finstas, the fake accounts, because they're able to get how the accounts are linked and information from there. So it is a lot of, they will ask those questions of where the priorities lie by his social media. I can't tell that he loves football. And we want players who love football. Not necessarily the dancers, not the baby mama, not the strip club, and not their fancy cars and they sagging pants. And also utilization of drugs that are illegal in certain states.
Okay. All right, Ray, a question?
All right, I appreciate you letting me jump in here. So I wanted to follow up to something you said earlier, like you're not playing against Norfolk State anymore. You're not playing against this school. One of the most successful HBCU players in my lifetime is Antoine Bethea, outside of maybe Steve McNair. And what he told me was during that process, he was frustrated because he said he saw guys who came from Power 5 schools who were not as talented as his HBCU teammates, but because they went to HBCUs, they did not get the looks that these guys. He said some of my guys could definitely compete and probably excel, but they won't get the opportunity because these guys went to like a Michigan or Alabama. How do you help players navigate that process? Because it is unfair, but it's the reality of the world that we live in, unfortunately.
It is the reality. I've heard that before. I've heard that many times, not only from HBCU players, but I've heard it also from FCS players. And I've heard it from some P4 players that I represented. Like, yeah, he's a dog. He's just as good as anybody else on the team. It is true to a certain extent. It's all about reps and development and the talent that you were going against that allowed you to have those consistent reps. That's usually the gap. That's usually the gap. You know, O linemen, in the NFL, you're dealing with O linemen that are 6'5", 6'7", right? And HBCUs, you were a great D lineman, but that 6'5", 6'7" guy may handle you because you never experienced a rep, and so they never demonstrated it on film, so they can't prove that you can do it. So that's when we're like, hey, I at least want to let you get them in camp. But in order to get you to camp, I got to get you to train. In order to get you to train, I got to get you to, your training has to deliver on your pro day. If you run a 5'4", you can't tell me you can compete athletically with any NFL player. It's not true. You can't.
All right. Keisha.
Yes. So it's great to meet you. I want to go back to when you were talking about the family dynamic, because one of my close friends is an NFL agent, and one of the people he represents is Keon, and we know how much he is a character. But when it comes to the dynamic of representing, we know you got to go through the mama, the daddy, sometimes the church, everybody when you're representing those athletes. how do you approach that, especially when you have somebody that's coming from like a smaller city, a smaller place, like not like in Atlanta, but you have like a smaller city that might be within that city? How do you approach, I'm gonna say somebody that's coming from a town, how do you approach those athletes?
I don't usually look, to be honest, I don't target them from necessarily where they're from. I target them based on their talent. And if they say, you know, the rest of the family needs to be on the call, we like to educate the whole family. And actually, before the draft, I often have the call with just the family because I want them to relieve that player of the pressure that is going to be on them during those next, you know, 3 or 4 weeks, right? Those next couple of weeks. And it's educating them through the process. I think the families are easier to work with and get to when you're truthful with them. Cool. It's hard sometimes to let a mama know, like, your son has had every opportunity. I've got him to 2 or 3 bowl games. He's seen 2 or 3 teams. He's went to a local day. He's went to the UFL. He's went to the CFL. And now his career is done. It's done. We got him the opportunities. He didn't show up for the opportunity, or he wasn't able to deliver on the opportunity. And that is a hard pill to swallow when you're dealing with a mom who's been sitting in the stands since that young man has been 5 years old, all the way until his college career, where he was a star on the billboard. And now he's at home watching the NFL. That is really hard. But yes, I start with the player skill first, but I will work the family in to make sure that they're educated on the process and answer all of their questions. So it usually works.
Okay. Rasheeda, let me ask you this. Do you have a few more minutes to stay with us? We have to go to commercial and we will be right back.
Yeah, sure.
All right. We will be right back with Miss Liberty. She's dropping some knowledge on you guys. Rasheeda Liberty, sports agent, and she does an excellent job. The one thing I had appreciated about you, Rasheeda, is the fact when you told me the story after what happened to Davis in the HBCU Legacy Bowl, how you really took care of him. And you were there every step of the way through his rehabilitation. And now he's going to be playing this spring with the Houston Roughnecks here in H-Town. So I'll get a chance to see Mr. Richard all the time now. But he's a fine young man. And I spoke to a couple of media guys, and they talked about how well prepared he was when he was doing his NFL Network interviews. And you spoke about how you were like, oh man, you get involved with the training and development there. How soon does that start? Is that immediate with your representation, or is it right before the draft, or how does that work?
They go through, it's pretty immediate. So one of the first things we do is an intake call with them, which is about 120 questions with the agency. And that goes through a lot of different dynamics to help us to be able to develop what we call marketing or player profile. From there, usually through that interview process, you understand more of how they answer the questions. And so we do start ramping up their interviewing soon as they do their training. So as their training starts in January, their interview prep is also started during that process. They're usually tired, but they have to do it because what we're doing during that January timeframe is we're getting them several interviews and ways to get in front of the media. So we're contacting several media outlets to put them in front. So with Davis specifically, we knew we wanted an ESPN article. We knew we wanted Sports Illustrated. We knew we wanted to feature him on NFL Network at least 3-4 times before the draft. So there's a media strategy developed for that player. And so they have to be ready. And we practice with Hometown. We practice with small newspapers, school newspapers, but it gradually gets them ready so that when they're ready to take that platform in March, April, when it's the most critical, they're able to be successful. And then we prep them for top 30 interviews as well when they travel the country to visit NFL teams.
Yeah, he had a great interview with myself and Ralph Cooper on the radio show as well. A lot of people called in and said how very impressed they were of him. Last question, Kim.
Hi, Rasheeda, I wanted to ask you something. I cover the league and in particular the Houston Texans on a daily basis. And I remember in 2019 when they drafted Titus Howard in the first round out of Alabama State, and being in the media room that night and hearing some of my colleagues from major news organizations ask, well, what's the swag? And I was like, seriously?
Mm-hmm.
But we get a chance every year to talk to the executive director of player personnel. And I'm always asking him, what's your process for looking at players at HBCUs? And I'm wondering, does it make a difference when you find a team that has a history or has drafted or been at least open to HBCU players, that those are opportunities that you build even, I want to say better, because I'm sure you want to have relationships with all the teams, but does that help? A team is at least
it helps. I have called out a couple teams personally to their player personnel and just said, what makes him different than the next guy is because he went here, or vice versa. Here's his results up against the next guy. So we're negotiating a lot of those discussions, to be honest, well before draft time. Like it's usually around bowl time. I do look sometimes to entities that draft or that have favored or put undrafted free agents in rotation on a roster. But what I realize is it's not necessarily the front office that has made that happen. A lot of times it's the area and the national and the Blesto scout who made those things happen. So I tend to follow the Blesto scouts or the NFS, NFL. I follow those scouts to see what teams they are now with, because they have a history of going into those schools and spending more time and dedicating the right space for that talent. And I also favor teams that do show up for the HBCU Legacy Bowl.
Right.
Definitely.
And not just with the area scout, with their top brass.
Yeah.
Look, Rasheeda, we have to get you back on so we can have a longer chat, because I know you got a lot to say, but it's some great educational information that you just dropped on us. Tell everybody how they can be able to find you.
Yeah, you can follow me at Lady Lib 1922, and that's an LIB as in boy, 1922. Also, you can reach me at Rasheeda at ladylib.com, but Twitter, Instagram, and we have Facebook. We don't utilize it that much, but Instagram and Twitter are kind of, or should I say X, are our main platforms to follow us, and our website, ladylib.com.
All right. Excellent. That's Miss Rasheeda Liberty. Thank you so much, Rasheeda.
All right. Appreciate you.
All right.